Every empire believes it's different, smarter, stronger, more advanced. Every empire looks at the ruins of the past and thinks, that won't be us. And every empire is wrong. History doesn't collapse civilizations in one dramatic moment. It dismantles them quietly, patiently, through the same sequence of mistakes, over and over again. Different flags, different languages, same ending. Rome believed it had mastered the world. Its roads connected continents. Its armies were unmatched. Its currency ruled trade. And yet, from inside, Rome was rotting long before barbarians arrived. Debt replaced discipline. Political theater replaced leadership. Money was debased to hide insolvency. Citizens stopped producing and started demanding. Rome didn't fall because it was invaded. It fell because it hollowed itself out. The same pattern appeared centuries later in the Abbasid Caliphate, a golden age of science, trade, and culture. Wealth flooded in, power concentrated, elites detached from reality. Spending exploded, corruption normalized. The system became too complex, too fragile, too dependent on trust. Once that trust broke, everything followed. The British Empire made the same mistakes. Convinced industrial dominance made it immune. It overextended. It financed wars with debt. It printed. It taxed productivity instead of excess. Slowly, silently, its power slipped away. The Spanish Empire drowned itself in silver. The French monarchy collapsed under inequality and debt. The Soviet Union decayed under central control, lies, and economic distortion. The Ottoman Empire suffocated under bureaucracy and stagnation. Different centuries, same blueprint. Every one of these empires made 5 core mistakes, not random errors, structural failures. And what should unsettle you is this: we are making all 5. Right now, not someday, not hypothetically, actively. The first mistake is always the same. Debt becomes normal. At first, debt is a tool, then it becomes a crutch, then it becomes survival. Empires stop asking, can we afford this? And start asking, who will pay for it later? The answer is always the same: the future. A future that never arrives. Because more debt is used to pay old debt. Rome diluted its coinage. France borrowed endlessly. Britain financed wars with credit. The Soviet Union hid insolvency behind fake numbers. The modern system does it with central banks and digital money. The method changes. The intent doesn't. The second mistake follows naturally: currency manipulation. When reality becomes inconvenient, empires change the measuring stick. They debase the currency, not because they're evil, but because they're desperate. It's easier than cutting spending, easier than losing power, easier than telling the truth. Inflation is never sold as destruction. It's sold as stimulus, stability, growth, temporary relief. And every time, it quietly transfers wealth from the many to the few. The third mistake is elite detachment. The people making decisions stop living under the consequences of those decisions. They're insulated, protected, abstracted from reality. When bread prices rise, they don't notice. When housing becomes unaffordable, they don't feel it. When savings are destroyed, it doesn't touch them. This is when resentment replaces loyalty. The fourth mistake is moral decay disguised as progress. Productivity is mocked. Dependency is encouraged. Responsibility is reframed as oppression. Every collapsing empire convinces its citizens that comfort is a right and sacrifice is unnecessary. The system promises more while producing less. And that gap is filled with debt, printing, and illusion. The fifth mistake is the most dangerous: belief that collapse is impossible. That's when warning signs are ignored. Critics are dismissed. History is ridiculed. Anyone who points to patterns is labeled dramatic, pessimistic, or outdated. Every empire reaches a moment where the evidence is overwhelming, yet trust remains intact. And that's when collapse becomes inevitable. Here's the uncomfortable part: empires don't fall when people panic. They fall when people still believe. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, that's not an accident. It's pattern recognition. Stay with me, because once you see how these 5 mistakes unfold and where we are inside that sequence, you'll understand why collapse never feels sudden to those who understand history. Collapse doesn't announce itself. It blends in. That's what makes it so effective. When an empire reaches this stage, life still looks normal on the surface. Shops are open. Screens are bright. Markets move. People go to work, plan vacations, argue online. Nothing feels like the end. And that's exactly why most people miss it. In late Rome, citizens didn't wake up thinking, today the empire falls. They woke up thinking about taxes, prices, and survival. Soldiers were paid in diluted coins. Merchants raised prices to compensate. The middle class shrank quietly. The poor grew desperate. The elite withdrew behind walls and titles. From the inside, it felt like decline. From the outside, it looked like stability. That's the psychological trap. Empires don't collapse through chaos first. They collapse through normalization. High debt becomes background noise. Inflation becomes manageable. Corruption becomes expected. Institutions lose credibility. But people keep using them because there's no obvious alternative. Trust erodes slowly, then all at once. Look at what happens at this stage every time. Productive citizens feel punished. Speculation is rewarded. Rules stop applying equally. Truth becomes flexible. In the final decades of the French monarchy, farmers starved while aristocrats debated etiquette. In the Soviet Union, shelves were empty while official reports claimed abundance. In Venezuela, professionals worked full-time jobs and still couldn't afford food. The system insisted everything was under control until it wasn't. The most dangerous moment is when people adapt instead of resist. They downsize dreams. They delay milestones. They accept less and call it maturity. That's not resilience. That's conditioning. Another pattern emerges here. The blame shifts downward. When systems fail, leaders don't say we mismanaged. They say you didn't try hard enough. You're told to work more, save better, budget smarter, inside a structure designed to drain you. Responsibility is individualized while failure is systemic. This is when anger begins to surface. Not loud anger, quiet anger, the kind that shows up as exhaustion, cynicism, and emotional withdrawal. People stop believing in institutions, but they don't yet stop participating in them. That contradiction creates stress, psychological pressure, a sense that something is wrong but unnamed. Historically, this is the phase right before acceleration. Rome responded with more control. France responded with more taxes. The Soviets responded with more propaganda. Modern systems respond with more liquidity, more regulation, more narrative management. Each response makes the structure more brittle, because the core problem is never addressed. The system is consuming more than it produces. At this stage, empires stop rewarding value creation and start rewarding compliance. Loyalty matters more than competence. Appearance matters more than outcomes. Metrics replace reality. And once reality is ignored long enough, it returns violently. There's a reason collapses feel sudden in hindsight. They aren't sudden. They're compressed. Years of slow decay pile up until one shock, financial, political, social, releases a pressure. A war, a banking failure, a currency crisis, a legitimacy collapse. The trigger changes. The fragility doesn't. What's important to understand is this. By the time collapse becomes obvious, it's already too late to prevent it. Prevention only exists earlier, when denial feels safer than truth. That's why most people experience collapse as something that happens to them, not something they saw coming. They trusted continuity. They assumed tomorrow would resemble yesterday. History punishes that assumption every time. And here's the uncomfortable parallel. The signs we're seeing today, debt dependence, asset inflation, institutional distrust, elite insulation, social fragmentation, don't belong to a healthy system in transition. They belong to a mature system approaching limits. This doesn't mean everything ends tomorrow. It means a margin for error is gone. And when a system has no margin for error, even small shocks become existential. What comes next isn't collapse yet. It's acceleration. The point where the stages stop being theoretical and start becoming personal. Once you step back far enough, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Empires don't fail randomly. They fail because they repeat the same mistakes across centuries, cultures, and technologies. Different flags, different languages, same errors. The first mistake is excessive debt. Every empire believes it can borrow its way through decline. Rome debased its currency. Spain borrowed against future silver. France financed luxury on credit. Modern states issue debt backed by promises instead of productivity. Debt feels painless at first. It postpones consequences. But debt always demands payment through inflation, collapse, or control. The second mistake is currency distortion. Money stops being a measure of value and becomes a political tool. When this happens, prices stop telling the truth. Wages disconnect from reality. Asset prices inflate while living standards fall. People feel poorer even when numbers rise. Trust in money erodes, and once money loses trust, everything built on it becomes unstable. The third mistake is elite insulation. As pressure builds, those at the top detach. They create buffers, legal, financial, geographic. They experience a different reality than everyone else. While the public adapts downward, elites adapt upward. This separation isn't just economic, it's psychological. Leaders stop understanding the consequences of their decisions. That gap is fatal. The fourth mistake is loss of shared narrative. Empires survive on belief. Belief in the future. Belief in fairness. Belief that sacrifices meaning. When that story fractures, cohesion dissolves. People stop agreeing on what's real. Truth becomes tribal. Loyalty replaces logic. Once a society can't agree on basic facts, coordinated action becomes impossible. The fifth mistake is overextension and fragility. Complex systems look strong until they aren't. Supply chains stretch. Institutions stack dependencies on top of dependencies. Efficiency replaces resilience. Everything works until one link breaks. And when it does, the failure cascades faster than anyone expects. These 5 mistakes don't appear one at a time. They reinforce each other. Debt pressures currency. Currency distortion widens inequality. Inequality isolates elites. Isolation fractures narrative. Fractured narratives make complex systems brittle. That's the cycle. And here's the critical part. Civilizations rarely recognize these mistakes as mistakes while they're making them. Each one is justified as temporary, necessary, or unavoidable. Leaders claim control. Experts assure stability. The public adapts again. Historically, this is when symbolism replaces substance. Grand projects are announced. Massive reforms are promised. New frameworks, new alliances, new visions. They look impressive. They photograph well. But underneath, the structural decay continues. Think of monuments built near the end of empires. They aren't signs of strength. They're signs of denial. People sense the instability, even if they can't articulate it. Anxiety rises. Trust falls. Social bonds weaken. Individuals retreat inward. Short-term thinking dominates. Survival replaces growth. This is where civilizations stop investing in the future and start extracting from the present. Maintenance is deferred. Institutions hollow out. Education shifts from wisdom to credentialism. Leadership prioritizes optics over outcomes. And the system becomes performative, still functioning, but no longer healthy. What's striking is how modern this always feels. Romans believed their world was too advanced to fall. French elites believed collapse was unthinkable. Soviet planners believed the system was permanent. Every civilization thinks it's the exception. That belief is the most dangerous mistake of all, because history doesn't care how advanced a society believes it is. Complexity doesn't prevent collapse. It accelerates it. The more interconnected a system becomes, the faster failures propagate once trust breaks. At this stage, collapse is inevitable, but reversal becomes extremely difficult. It would require sacrifice from those who benefit most, and that almost never happens voluntarily, which leads to the final stages. Not the moment everything breaks, but the moment people realize the system no longer serves them. That realization changes behavior, and behavior is what ultimately determines how collapse unfolds. That's where this story goes next. There's a moment in every collapsing civilization when the system stops pretending it exists for the people, not officially, not in speeches, but in practice. Rules begin to change, quietly at first. What was once unthinkable becomes temporary. What was temporary becomes permanent. Emergency powers linger. Restrictions expand. The system no longer asks for trust. It demands compliance. At this stage, citizens feel something shift. They're still working, still paying taxes, still following the rules. But the return on participation collapses. Effort no longer leads to security. Obedience no longer guarantees stability. The social contract fractures. And when that happens, behavior changes. People stop planning long-term. They stop saving for futures they no longer believe in. They extract what they can when they can, not because they're immoral, but because the system taught them that loyalty is punished and skepticism is rewarded. Institutions respond by tightening control. Capital controls appear. Censorship expands. Financial surveillance increases. Rules are enforced selectively, not to restore trust, but to preserve order. History shows this pattern clearly. Late-stage empires don't collapse from chaos alone. They collapse from overcorrection. Attempts to force stability accelerate the loss of legitimacy. The harder the system grips, the faster trust evaporates. This is where inflation becomes normalized. Prices rise, but explanations multiply. Temporary shocks, external enemies, supply issues, transitions. People are told to be patient, to endure, to adapt again. Meanwhile, wages lag, savings decay, purchasing power bleeds slowly, invisibly. Most people don't riot at this stage. They retreat. They disengage socially. They avoid risk. They focus on survival. Civic participation drops. Creativity declines. Innovation slows. The system still exists, but it's hollow. Meanwhile, elites consolidate. They convert fragile assets into durable ones. They move capital quietly. They secure exemptions. The same policies that punish the public protect those closest to power. This isn't corruption in the dramatic sense. It's structural self-preservation. Systems protect their architects. What's dangerous is how normal this begins to feel. People adapt to smaller lives, lower expectations, narrower horizons. They normalize what previous generations would have considered unacceptable. And because the decline is gradual, resistance weakens. Collapse rarely looks like an explosion. It looks like compression. Less freedom, less opportunity, less trust, all wrapped in language about safety, fairness, and necessity. By the time the majority realizes the system is working against them, the tools to resist are already constrained. Financial exits are limited. Speech is policed. Alternatives are discouraged. The cost of dissent rises. This is the stage where societies fracture internally. Groups blame each other instead of the structure. Politics becomes emotional, tribal, personal. Solutions become symbolic instead of functional. Energy is spent fighting narratives rather than fixing foundations. And through it all, the system continues to insist it's stable. That insistence is revealing, because truly stable systems don't need constant reassurance. They don't need emergency measures year after year. They don't need permanent crisis language. They don't need to punish those who opt out. When a system reaches this stage, the question is no longer if change is coming, but how it will arrive. Peacefully, gradually, or violently. History offers every version. And the final stage depends on one thing: whether enough people recognize the pattern early enough to change their behavior before the system forces it upon them. That decision point, individual and collective, is where the cycle either softens or snaps. Every empire believes it's the exception, that its technology is superior, that its institutions are stronger, that its leaders are smarter, that its collapse, if it ever comes, will be managed. This belief isn't arrogance. It's denial dressed as confidence. Rome believed its roads, its laws, its armies made it eternal. The British Empire believed its navy and global trade guaranteed dominance. The Soviet Union believed ideology could override economic reality. Each was certain the old rules no longer applied, and each made the same final mistake. They ignored the limits. Debt expanded faster than productivity. Complexity grew faster than coordination. Trust eroded faster than authority could compensate. And instead of correcting course early, they doubled down. More control, more money printing, more narratives explaining why discomfort was necessary. By the time reality reasserted itself, the margin for adjustment was gone. This is where many people misunderstand collapse. They imagine a single event, a crash, a war, a revolution. But collapse is usually the loss of optionality, the moment when choices disappear, when adaptation becomes reaction, when survival replaces progress. That's the real end of an empire, not when buildings fall, but when futures shrink. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Civilizations don't fail because people stop working. They fail because systems stop rewarding work fairly. When effort no longer translates into security, participation declines. When trust is punished, skepticism becomes rational. At that point, the system consumes itself. The 5 mistakes repeat because they're human mistakes: psychological mistakes, political mistakes, moral mistakes, overexpansion, debt dependence, currency debasement, elite insulation, and denial. Every empire hits all 5. The only variable is timing. This isn't about fear. It's about awareness. Understanding the pattern doesn't mean panic. It means clarity. It means recognizing where you are in a cycle and adjusting accordingly, mentally, financially, socially. History shows that while systems collapse, people who adapt early often don't. They stop trusting narratives and start reading incentives. They stop chasing growth and start protecting resilience. They diversify dependencies. They reduce exposure to fragile structures, not because they're pessimists, but because they're realists. Civilizations collapse in stages, but individuals don't have to follow the same path. The danger isn't knowing this. The danger is refusing to see it, because the empires that fell didn't lack warnings. They lacked listeners. And now the pattern is visible again, not as prophecy, not as prediction, but as repetition. You're not watching history. You're standing inside it. And what you do with that awareness, whether you ignore it, resist it, or adapt to it, will define which side of collapse you experience. Not all endings are the same, but the mistake that seals them always is. Believing this time is different.